Hello and welcome to our second edition today of KILTR Rising, which is a series of live broadcasts run by the media and tech company KILTR.com. Thank you again to our collaborators, Independence Live, and following on from a really good chat this morning with the hacktivist Laurie Love. But today it's 2 o'clock, 3 p.m. in Sweden, where I'm joined by our guest today, Professor Marcello Ferrada de Noli, I hope I pronounced that right, Professor, who is a chairman of Swedish Doctors for Human Rights, and he is also editor-in-chief of the online magazine Indictor. Hello, Professor, how are you doing?
Thanks. How are you doing?
Yep, thank you for joining me today. For people watching at home, today we're going to be discussing a few topics, including the Julian Assange case, and the professor obviously is editor-in-chief of Indictor, and he has published 2 or 3 articles in the past couple of weeks. Now, firstly, Professor, I'd like to read out an email that I received from the Swedish government round about February 4th or 5th, following the UN group's report. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention deemed that Mr. Assange is arbitrarily detained in contravention of the international commitments. We note that the working group's views differ from that of the Swedish authorities. The legal process is handled in court by the Swedish prosecutors, and it cannot be commented on by the Swedish government. Any further questions concerning international judicial cooperation are referred to the Ministry of Justice Division for Criminal Cases and International Judicial Cooperation. Now, my first question, Professor, is why has Assange never been charged?
Well, with regard to the declaration of the Swedish government that you just mentioned, they have also said in other occasions, for instance at the Swedish TV, that a United Nations panel cannot be considered as ruling over the Swedish court. About your question, why Assange has not been charged? Well, the investigation, or so-called investigation, has not been complete. And according to the Swedish law, it's only after the conclusion of an investigation conducted by a prosecutor, a decision has to be made as whether the person should be charged or released because there's no ground for the accusations.
Thanks a lot. Are you aware of the article that appeared in...
If I may add something else.
Yeah, of course.
Relevant, quite relevant in this context. I recall now that the former Minister of Justice, Mr. Thomas Bodström, who was also a partner in the law firm Bodström and Bergström, which represented the compliance in the case against Assange. He has recently declared in Sweden, also at the Swedish television, that he would believe that the case has sufficient ground to make it to court, so to speak. Whether it's going ever to be a case in court, that is extremely unlikely, because there are no grounds for the accusations that have been put forward, which the media has labeled as accusations of rape, whereas the women in the context here have said, for their part, at least one of them, that this rape denomination was something made up by the police. It's not what they went to the police station to complain about.
Sure. I'm going to draw the viewers at home's attention to a statement from AP yesterday, which appeared in Sky, regarding Ecuador and Sweden's bilateral agreement. Ecuador confirmed it has not stood in the way of the judicial proceedings requested by the Swedish prosecutor, for who her part has not complied with standard procedures for international judicial cooperation outlined in the recently signed bilateral agreement between Sweden and Ecuador. Now, this is where it gets a bit confusing for me. Why, even though the first question was why hasn't Julian Assange been charged, if Ecuador and Sweden have this bilateral agreement, why haven't the prosecutors even spoke to him yet?
Well, one of the reasons stated by the prosecutor in this case is that Sweden would follow in these cases an European convention and not any other agreement of the one you are taking up here. But those are formalities, those are the excuses why the things are not going forward. There are, in my opinion, political reasons why this process or the process of the investigation per se has not been completed and has been standing by for over 5 years now. And those reasons, in my opinion, are related to the efforts of governments to hamper in some way the activities of WikiLeaks, which is viewed as these governments as a source for information, disclosures and exposures of certain activities considered by the international law as, for instance, war crimes and other irregularities.
Sure. The Swedish arm of Amnesty International, they are partly funded by the Swedish government, is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
Does that not compromise Sweden's Amnesty International arm's impartiality, i.e., I wasn't aware that any arms of Amnesty International were funded by governments, and obviously with your articles in the is it Indictor or in, how do you pronounce your magazine? Indictor, sorry.
Well, okay, I mean.
Indictor, yeah. I mean, basically the question is the Swedish arm of Amnesty International and the fact that it received funding from the Swedish government kind of renders their position on the Assange case somewhat redundant, really.
Well, in principle, no so-called non-governmental organization which is receiving even partly, like in this case, funds from the government, could be regarded as fully objective, in my opinion. Actually, our organization, Swedish Doctor for Human Rights, has a very clear policy about that. We do not ask for sponsorship or funding from any governmental or even corporate sectors to keep the independence that we're supposed to have. And then also it's a matter of credibility. But what hurts the credibility of an organization of human rights is actually their behavior, their stance. In this case, the stance that the Swedish section of Amnesty International has held on the Assange case has put in question their credibility and directly the international prestige of Sweden as such.
Yeah, the Swedish government themselves, when the working group's report came out on the 4th or 5th of February, I think it was, the UK government, Jeremy Hammond, was quite happy to intervene, but the Swedish government have been almost mute, which is a bit strange. I'm not quite sure why the UK government feels the need to get involved, but the Swedish government say that they can't. You know, there's a passing of the buck here, in essence. There's a passing of the buck from the Swedish government to the prosecutors, and the prosecutors have done nothing.
Well, the Swedish government says that what the prosecutors would decide on the case is completely on their own decision, on their own capability, legally so. But it is not actually that clear, because the Swedish government, it is entitled by law to intervene in processes in which issues of the foreign policy of Sweden are compromised, like in the case of Julian Assange. That is why we have some sort of communication vessels between sections of the government, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the prosecutor authority, and they overlap. So it's difficult to assess who is guiding what in this case. But I repeat that the case has an absolutely clear political and even geopolitical character.
I've got a question for you with regard to your article dated 6th of March in the Indictor, that a former paid agent of the Swedish security police, Fredriksson, I think his name was, dictated Amnesty Sweden's stance against Assange. I contacted Amnesty Sweden. They responded to me that the claim in the Indictor is complete nonsense and without any substance. No individual external to Amnesty International have had any influence on our policy whatsoever. The accusations made entirely misrepresent our policy-making process. Can you respond to that for me, please?
Wait, I'm going to fetch the article if I have it here.
Sure.
I don't have it at hand, unfortunately, but first, may I say that please do notice that the article, I signed the article as chairman of the Swedish Doctor for Human Rights, meaning that this is the position of my organization, it's not only a personal stand. Then indeed, the article was titled something about a former agent paid by the Swedish security services dictated to Amnesty the stance that they would have regarding the Assange case. In this particular episode, it was regarding the issue of non-extradition to guarantees of non-extradition to Assange, in the sense that he would not be sent to the USA in case the government of Sweden received such a request. That was the title of the article. And well, to the best of my knowledge in English, to dictate is to request, to give certain instructions. And that's the only thing that we have said. We have said that a person that formerly was a paid agent by the Swedish security forces has communicated to Amnesty Sweden a series of items that oppose a possible stance from Amnesty Sweden supporting the stance of their parent organization based in London, meaning Amnesty International. Amnesty International, based in London, have issued a statement asking the Swedish government the issuing of these non-extradition guarantees on behalf of Julian Assange. Well, this person, this agent, or former agent, I'm sorry, writes a note to per email to Amnesty International Sweden, and the day after, a representative of this organization, Amnesty Sweden, is interviewed by the local, which is a online paper based in Sweden, and the declarations he put forward there are exactly the same content of the message this person from the security services, former agent of the security forces, has sent to Amnesty. Not only that, the declarations of the representative of Amnesty International and the content of the message of that agent were also nearly identical to the declarations made some weeks ago, that even by the former foreign minister of Sweden, I mean the foreign minister of Sweden at the time, Mr. Carl. So whether that was a coincidence, whether it's a coincidence that the government has the same position than Amnesty International Sweden and the same position as security forces, well, who cares? I mean, that's not the issue. The central issue here, and that is not met by Amnesty International Sweden. I mean, the central issue in our criticism is the content of their stance. The content of their position is vulnerable, is infringing the human rights of Mr. Julian Assange as a person, and also is totally in contravention to the decisions taken by their parent organization, Amnesty International, based in London.
Sure. Today, another article appeared in the Spanish news site Telesur. Swedish government paid agent to intervene in Assange. So this story is definitely building in weight. Thank you, Kevin. Professor.
Well, it's about the first question that you mentioned, some declarations from the part of the government of Ecuador and responses, if I understood right, put forward by the Swedish government about this process, which has been, I mean, this investigation process that has been stopped and not put forward. We have to think or we have to reflect on the fact that the prosecutor, the Swedish prosecutor, had very many possibilities, opportunities to proceed with the interrogation of Assange. So the question is why the Swedish prosecutors have not done that. You know, for instance, we have the possibility the Swedish prosecutor had when Assange was still in Swedish territory. That's one thing. Secondly, when after the European arresting warrant was issued by the Swedish prosecutor, Assange he himself went to the police station in London, if I recall well. But after that, he was taken into arrest. Actually, he was incommunicado in a high security imprisonment facility. He was there a week. There, the Swedish prosecutor had all the possibilities to proceed with interrogation. I mean, Assange was, so to speak, in an unescapable situation. So why the prosecutor did not take that possibility? Third, we have about, I mean, it's over 500 days between that event and Assange sought political asylum at the embassy of Ecuador. And during that time, I mean, it's almost 2 years, the prosecutor did not proceed with that interrogation. So we have not an episode, we have a behavior here, and the same like in the case of Amnesty, there are not one thing which has occurred, but there are several facts pointing to the same direction. So we have to have an explanation of why this process has been taken to this stalemate, and the explanations, the legal explanations, are not enough. So we have to explain this in another context, and it's there when we find this political and geopolitical context, which might explain all these tragic developments. Tragic for a person whose human rights has been so drastically infused.
Do you feel that the Swedish prosecutors have failed the women in this case?
Well, of course, at the same time that they have hampered they have refused to go on with the interrogation process when they had, as I said again, all the possibilities. Of course, they are delaying also a process for the women that apparently were behind these complaints.
Okay, I've got no more questions. Is there anything you'd like to add, Professor?
Well, thinking that you mentioned that this article was authored by me in the Nectar.
In Dictor, yeah.
I already said to you that this is a whole organization behind this criticism to Amnesty. And this organization, the board of directors of this organization, is composed mostly by professors and doctors. We share, I might say, a common methodological approach. We do not, as we would not assess a diagnosis because of one symptom that once have occurred in the life of a patient, of a person. We would not pass any assessment of any person or organization for some bad statement or unfortunate statement they have done there once. But in the case of Amnesty International, this is only one of the events in which they have clearly shown clearly showing a commitment, not always according to the ethics of human rights, which other organizations do push you. They refer now, and they try to defend their stance they took in September 2012. But 2 years later, and excuse me, you mentioned something that in the declaration of Amnesty International, I did not get clearly if it was an answer to your question or if it's a declaration, a public declaration from theirs. But you mentioned something that our criticism was ungrounded and that and they were misrepresenting.
I'll read it out for you, Professor. This is a statement that I received from an individual, Amnesty Sweden. I think her name's Amy Hedenborg, and she works for Madeleine, the lawyer Madeleine Seidlich. I can't really pronounce the name, pardon me. The statement goes that the claim in the Indicta article is complete nonsense and without any substance. No individual external to Amnesty International have had any influence on our policy whatsoever. The accusations made entirely misrepresent our policy-making process. I'm assuming they're referring to the secret agent, Fredrickson, I think his name is, or... Martin Fredrickson, yeah.
Erik, if I may say, in the main, we are not making any accusation as such. We are stating facts. We are stating the following facts. We are stating that Eriksson did wrote to Amnesty requesting a certain stance from Amnesty. And we are saying that Amnesty took a stance which was not similar but identical to that request, and also identical to the one having by the government. Those are facts. Where is the nonsense in those facts? Now, if Amnesty did that because own conviction or else, well, that is not the issue. Okay, that is not the issue. But what I wanted to say to you with this brief introduction I said about who is behind the article is that we have this assessment that I mean, particularly when it comes to once again the process, the decision process that Amnesty has. For instance, in the annual conference they had, if I believe in 2014, a group of delegates presented in that decision policy event. They presented a proposition of human rights activities on behalf of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. The executives of Amnesty International, I mean the board handling the whole conference, they opposed that, and then they got along with that proposition. So there you have another episode in which they have shown their stance against whistleblowers, Assange and Snowden. And then we have again now in the 16th of March now, they produced this statement, and now we can say that they produced that statement because of the Indictor article. Well,
Yeah.
okay. The thing is that in that statement, they again take the position of the Swedish government.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, they say this in their statement. You can check that if you have the document there. I don't have it here, but they say Sweden is a country abiding to the rule of law. And a country, a government which to respect the international agreements and so on and so forth. That's the first thing that Amnesty said. Well, it is, to say the least, odd that Amnesty Sweden would come into the defense of the Swedish government in that sense, exactly after the Swedish government has refused to respect the ruling of the United Nations body, the United Nations Working Group for Arbitrary Detention, which said that Julian Assange should be released and also even paid some sort of compensation. So I might say it is kind of embarrassing for the Swedish section of Amnesty International come to this forceful defense of the stance of the Swedish government, which is clearly against conventions, like, for instance, the United Nations Convention for Political Rights, which Sweden has signed. So there is no respect for those conventions that the Swedish government has signed. So how can Amnesty International state that thing? So this is something which is going against them, the prestige of Amnesty International worldwide, and also the prestige of Sweden, which I may say had during very many years a very high standard on these issues and very well respected in the world because of their active funding for peace and human rights in the world.
Yeah, I've got the statement from Amnesty Sweden here. The last paragraph is somewhat contradictory, given what happened in early February. Amnesty International Sweden believes that Sweden is a constitutional state which respects its international obligations. Now, what is confusing about that sentence to me is if they respect its international obligations, why are they not respecting the UN's working group's report?
Anything happened with the transmission, with the broadcasting?
All good. Yeah, I'm just picking up, Professor, on the statement on Amnesty Sweden's website that says Amnesty International Sweden believes that Sweden is a constitutional state which respects its international obligations. That's confusing to me, given that this is an organisation that's partly funded by the Swedish government, and the Swedish government aren't adhering to the UN's working group's report. If you want to respond to that, and then we can finish up.
Well, I tried to say that before. That is nonsense, not only a contradiction, because there are two conventions on which the United Nations panel was basing their ruling. One is the United Nations Human Rights. The other one is the International Covenant for Political Rights, and so on. And there you have the Article 9, the other one you have the Article 1, etc., etc. And those covenants have been signed by Sweden. And here you have the fact that they are not respecting those conventions. There are no defense for that. Secondly, now when you're reading this, I remember that there is another part in the statement of the Swedish section of Amnesty International. They say, certainly we would recommend Sweden and the UK to do to strain their efforts in order to comply with this United Nations resolution. But at the same time, please do observe that they add the following. They say something like, but we still believe that the investigation against Assange has to be finished, pursued and finished.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes, but that means that the applicability of the European arresting warrant or similar has to be still under enforcement, and that's exactly the opposite of what the United Nations ruling is saying. The United Nations ruling is saying in number one conclusion of their document, they're saying that the European arresting warrant should cease to exist, something like that. But basically, that Mr. Julian Assange has to be released, and a compensation should be honored towards him.
Yeah.
Well, Erik, sorry, I have another commitment now, but if you are satisfied with this, or we could continue a bit later if you wish.
Sure. Sure. I'm happy to continue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. On you go. Professor, are you ready?
But I'm sorry. Ready? Yes. Okay. One short question, please, or one question with a short answer.
No, I've got no more questions. I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Erik.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to your program.
No. Thank you for joining us. And please stay online. We're going to go off air, but stay online, and we'll have a chat off air.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.